Chapter 1. The Sassapete bride of the stormy night thunder ripped across the Mayfair sky, rattling the leaded window panes of the Harlow townhouse. The tempest unleashed a torrential downpour, as if determined to drown the very streets of London. Wind howled through the crevices, whipping the crimson velvet drapes of the drawing room, where flickering candles cast twisted, dancing shadows upon the walls. A suffocating gloom hung over the house, reflecting the desperate air weighing heavily upon the Harlow family. Everything had crumbled. Beatrice Harlow, the family's sole hope of escaping utter ruin, had eloped with her lover on the very eve of the nuptials. This arranged marriage was to be their final lifeline. The marriage settlement had been signed, and the groom was none other than the Duke of Ravenscroft, a man of notorious ruthlessness. His Grace had agreed to discharge their astronomical debts in exchange for Beatrice's hand. Her flight did not merely invite social ruin, it triggered the immediate recall of their debts. If the bride did not present herself at the Ravenscroft chapel by dawn, the Harlow estate would be foreclosed. The family would be cast onto the streets penniless. Lady Evelyn paced restlessly upon the worn, threadbare carpet, her venomous gaze locked onto the pile of promissory notes scattered across the table. "Have you still not found her?" Evelyn snarled as the butler entered the room. "My lady, Miss Beatrice's carriage departed 2 hours ago. The storm is too fierce, our men lost her tracks," he stammered, his voice trembling. Evelyn gritted her teeth. She knew the Duke possessed not a shred of mercy. If the bride failed to arrive on schedule, his Grace would utterly crush them. From the shadowed corner of the drawing room, standing behind a dust-laden marble bust, Genevieve Harlow watched in silence. She wore a drab, well-worn woolen gown, her dark hair neatly braided. As the eldest daughter of the late Lord Harlow and his first wife, she had been relegated to the status of a common maid by her stepmother ever since her father's passing. She observed Evelyn's hysteria with a calm, detached gaze. She understood the gravity of the tragedy unfolding, yet she did not suspect that she was about to be dragged into the center of it as a substitute bride. Evelyn halted, her venomous gaze locked onto Genevieve. A cruel, calculating smile spread across her face. "Genevieve," she murmured, stepping forward, her voice freezing as ice. "You are the one who will save this family." Genevieve took a step back, only to find her path blocked by 2 burly footmen. "What is the meaning of this, stepmother?" she demanded, keeping her voice steady. "You will don Beatrice's wedding gown, shroud your face beneath the bridal veil, and board the Ravenscroft carriage to settle this debt," Evelyn sneered, her fingers gripping Genevieve's shoulders with bruising force. "The nuptials will take place at dawn. The veil must not be lifted until the marriage settlement is signed. By then it will be too late for him to recant. This is madness. It is an outright deception." Genevieve protested. "The Duke of Ravenscroft is no fool. When he uncovers this lie, his wrath will utterly crush us. That is of no concern of mine." Evelyn snarled, shoving her roughly onto the sofa. "If you refuse, our home will be seized before the night is out. I will not have my precious Beatrice suffer. You will pay this debt." At Evelyn's command, the maids roughly dragged Genevieve up to a dim bedchamber. They stripped away her threadbare gown, forcing her into Beatrice's white satin wedding dress. The gown hung loose across her chest, but her waist was brutally constricted by the corset. They yanked the laces tight, forcing the air from her lungs as a sharp pain pierced her ribs. Finally, a thick lace veil was draped over her head, completely concealing her features beneath the heavy shroud of white. Lady Evelyn swept in, callously seizing the small wooden box that held the jewelry of Genevieve's late mother. "That is the only keepsake my mother left me," Genevieve protested, but Evelyn struck her across the face through the veil. The force of the blow sent her sprawling onto the floor, her lips split and bleeding. "A substitute bride deserves no dowry," Evelyn retorted coldly, slipping the box into her reticule. "These trinkets will settle Beatrice's gambling debts. You shall go to Ravenscroft empty-handed." She yanked the simple necklace from the girl's neck, snapping the chain and leaving a raw red welt upon her pale skin. Though stripped of her outer adornments, Genevieve harbored a vital secret. Hidden deep beneath the lining of her bridal slipper was a thin brass key. It belonged to an iron strongbox that her father, Lord Harlow, had deposited at the Bank of London shortly before his sudden demise. Within that chest lay crucial documents that could expose Lady Evelyn's misdeeds. More importantly, she possessed the cipher required to open it. Her father had designed a combination lock based on complex sequences of prime numbers, teaching the method of decryption to her alone. No one could force the strongbox open without destroying the fragile papers inside. This key in her mind would be the weapons that would allow her to survive and demand justice. Suddenly a heavy knock reverberated from the ground floor. The townhouse doors parted to admit an unexpected guest amidst the storm, Lord Henry Vance. He stepped into the foyer, his greatcoat dripping wet, his handsome features twisted into a sinister smirk. Vance was the cousin of the Duke of Ravenscroft, a man who fiercely coveted the Duke's title and vast estates. As Genevieve was escorted down the staircase, she caught sight of him through the sheer lace of her veil. He stood whispering with Lady Evelyn by the hearth. "Are you certain this scheme will hold, Evelyn?" "Ravenscroft is not easily deceived," Vance murmured, his voice low and plodding. "If he discovers this chit is an impostor before the signing, our plans will fall to ruin." "Rest easy, Henry," Evelyn whispered, a malicious grin playing upon her lips. "She has no voice. The moment the carriage departs, she belongs to Ravenscroft. He will assume the debts, and we shall have exactly what we desire." Genevieve's knuckles whitened as her hands clenched into tight fists. Vance's presence was proof that Beatrice's elopement was no simple folly of the heart. A grand conspiracy was being woven against the Duke, and she was merely a pawn. Vance intended to use this fraudulent marriage to bring about Ravenscroft's downfall. The sound of iron carriage wheels grinding against gravel cut through the rain. The Ravenscroft carriage had arrived, a stark, pitch-black coach bearing the family crest, a black raven with wings unfurled beneath an iron coronet, the very symbol of terrifying power. The Ravenscroft footmen waited in the downpour, their expressions stony. They regarded Genevieve with cold disdain, viewing this bride as nothing more than a bartered commodity, sent to appease their master's wrath. "Go and never return," Evelyn hissed, shoving Genevieve out onto the threshold into the biting rain. Immediately, the howling wind whipped her skirts, and the driving rain soaked through her veil, plastering the lace to her face. Genevieve stepped carefully onto the slippery stone steps. Behind her, the mocking whispers of the Harlow servants followed. "Look at Miss Genevieve. She is walking straight into the devil's lair. They say the Duke is monstrously cruel. How can a mere substitute survive such a man?" Genevieve boarded the carriage. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, severing all connection to Harlow Townhouse. Inside, it was dark and freezing. As the carriage lurched forward, Genevieve sat in utter solitude, her body shivering from the cold, yet her eyes burned with iron resolve. She did not weep. Tears were a useless indulgence now. She gently touched the lining of her slipper where the brass key lay hidden. Her father had once taught her that even the most complex equations possessed a solution, if one had but the patience to seek it. She would find her escape. She would not submit to fate, nor to the schemes of her stepmother and Vance. She would face the Duke of Ravenscroft with her dignity intact. The black carriage raced into the stormy night, hurtling toward the perils of Ravenscroft Castle. Chapter 2. The Duke's discovery. The winter storm in Yorkshire raged with a fury that threatened to swallow the carriage bearing the Ravenscroft falcon crest. Inside the cramped cabin, Genevieve Harlow sat in solitary silence amidst the howling, icy wind, the coarse white satin of her wedding gown chafing against her cold skin. The cheap bridal veil covering her face fluttered wildly each time the wheels jolted into a deep mud rut. With no lady's maid to attend her, and no grand dowry to her name, she carried only a small reticule containing a few of her late father's old mathematical manuscripts, and a proud heart that had never bowed to adversity. Mere hours ago in London, everything had crumbled. Beatrice, her half-sister, had fled with her lover, taking all her jewels just before the nuptials. To prevent the Duke of Ravenscroft from seizing the Harlow estate, to settle their debts under the terms of the marriage settlement, her stepmother, Lady Evelyn, had dragged Genevieve from the library. Screaming hysterically, the woman forced Genevieve into Beatrice's spare bridal gown, before roughly shoving her into the waiting carriage. "You must stand in for Beatrice," Lady Evelyn had hissed with venom before slamming the carriage door shut. "If the Duke discovers the truth before signing the marriage settlement, we shall all be cast into the streets. Keep your mouth shut, and play the part of a silent doll, until the matter is settled." Genevieve did not weep. She knew this was a dangerous gamble, yet it was her sole escape from the imprisonment and financial tyranny of her stepmother. She entered Ravenscroft not to be traded as a debt settlement, but to seek justice for her father's suspicious death. The carriage ground to a halt before Ravenscroft Manor, a grey stone castle standing imposing upon the cliffside in the midst of the tempest. Genevieve was led through dark corridors, the rain-soaked hem of her wedding gown dragging across the cold stone floors. She was brought directly to the grand drawing room in the west wing, instead of the bridal chamber. The room, though warmed by a crackling hearth, felt suffocatingly solemn, lined with portraits of past dukes staring down with icy indifference. The double door swung open and Alistair Vance entered. Clad in a heavy black wool frock coat, the Duke's towering figure befitting a former cavalry officer exuded an oppressive authority. The scar running down his left cheek, a grim relic of war, only heightened his dangerous, cold demeanor. His dark blue eyes were as still as a frozen lake, devoid of any warmth. Tossing his black leather gloves onto the mahogany writing desk, Alistair motioned for the servants to withdraw. He stepped directly before Genevieve, and with a swift, decisive motion of his large hand, ripped the bridal veil away from her face. Beneath the flickering firelight, her delicate features, pale from the biting cold, were laid bare. Alistair narrowed his eyes, taking in her tall, slender frame before his gaze locked onto her quiet, ash-gray eyes. She stared back at him, showing not a single trace of panic or pleading. "You are not Beatrice Harlow," he spoke, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register. "Beatrice is half a head shorter than you, and she is a shallow, vain creature who trembles in terror whenever I look her way. My bride would never possess such calm, intelligent eyes when facing the man society deems a monster." He took a step closer, letting his formidable presence press down upon her. "Who has swapped the bride of Ravenscroft? Did your stepmother truly believe she could deceive me with a mere substitute?" Genevieve stood tall, maintaining her poise with impeccable grace. "I am Genevieve Harlow, your grace. Beatrice fled with her lover last night. My stepmother forced me to act as her substitute to prevent the seizure of the Harlow estate. However, I did not come here to continue that pathetic deception." The Sez raised an eyebrow in genuine surprise, confessing the truth the very moment you arrive. "Are you not afraid that I might cast you out into the raging storm this instant? Or have you thrown into jail for attempting to defraud a peer of the realm?" "I am indeed," she replied candidly, her gaze unwavering. "But I know you to be a rational man, your grace, and I bring a proposal far more valuable than my stepmother's lies." Alistair leaned back against the mahogany writing desk, crossing his arms over his chest as a cold smirk played on his lips. "And what could an outcast substitute bride possibly have to offer me?" "The financial salvation of Ravenscroft," she said, stepping closer and pointing toward the ledger lying open on the desk. "While your grace is preoccupied with a flighty bride, the Ravenscroft estate is bleeding precisely 30% of its annual operating budget without your knowledge." Alistair's eyes narrowed, sharp as blades. "What is the meaning of this?" "The financial reports submitted by your cousin, Lord Henry Vance, are a sophisticated fabrication," she said, picking up a quill and swiftly scratching down several figures onto a scrap sheet. "Henry claimed the southern dike repairs doubled in cost due to natural disasters, yet the actual meteorological records for Yorkshire over the past 3 years show the region was completely dry. Furthermore, he reported a 20% drop in wool sales due to disease, yet the number of tenant farmers paying the wool tithe in your rent rolls remains unchanged." She looked up, the warm firelight reflecting off the rims of her spectacles. "Henry Vance has been signing forged receipts with London merchants to line his own pockets. He is conspiring with my stepmother to drain your estate, intending to force your grace into relinquishing the mineral rights to the Western Valley coal mines." Alistair stared down at the logic of the numbers. Her mathematical brilliance was evident in every calculation. Her unvarnished candor was a stark contrast to the haughty ladies of the London season. This woman did not beg for mercy. She used her intellect as a weapon to bargain for her survival. "How did you come by this information?" His voice softened, carrying an undercurrent of begrudging respect. "My father taught me mathematics and bookkeeping from a young age," she murmured, a fleeting shadow of grief crossing her face at the mention of her late parent. "Before his passing, I managed the Harlow estate myself. Henry Vance's transaction records were sent to our house, and I committed them all to memory." Alistair paced the room in silence. He was facing intense pressure from the Crown to marry, a political maneuver to curb his influence. Beatrice's flight would invite a scandal that would shatter his already fragile reputation. But this woman, she had a legitimate claim to the name, and possessed a brilliant mind that could help him purge the traitors from his house. Alistair stopped in front of Genevieve, searching the depths of her eyes. "A compact, Genevieve," he proposed, his voice low and deliberate. "You shall play the part of the Duchess for exactly 1 year. This title will silence the Crown's meddling matchmakers and shield you from your stepmother. In exchange, you will use your intellect to reform the estate's finances and expose Henry Vance's fraudulent reports before the family council." He emphasized each word. "During this year you shall have the full authority of the Duchess. No one, either at Ravenscroft or in London, shall be permitted to slander or look down upon you. At the end of the year, we shall obtain a quiet separation. I will provide you with a settlement generous enough to secure your independence for life, and assist you in reclaiming the Harlow estate from your stepmother." Genevieve looked at the broad hand extended before her. A cold businesslike transaction. She had no need for a romantic farce. She needed a powerful ally to survive and exact her vengeance. "I agree to your terms, Your Grace," Genevieve said, placing her small hand into the warm, firm palm of the Duke. Thus the Ravenscroft compact was sealed in the heart of the storm, embarking the substitute bride on a path of proud defiance and triumphant status reversal. Chapter 3. The new home. The biting Yorkshire wind howled without cease, lashing frozen sleet against the Gothic windows of Ravenscroft Manor. The tempestuous wedding night had passed, leaving behind a cold, stark reality. Genevieve Harlow stood before the tarnished bronze mirror, exchanging her pristine white bridal gown for a simple, ash-gray woolen dress. She was not the haughty Lady Beatrice, who had fled before the nuptial hour, but merely a substitute bride, carrying the staggering debts of the Harlow family. Though His Grace, Duke Alistair Vance, had agreed to a 1-year marriage settlement, her life in this desolate estate would surely be far from easy. As Genevieve stepped down into the grand hall, a biting chill quickly enveloped her. Ravenscroft Manor possessed none of the warmth of London, offering only moss-clad grey stone walls and echoing corridors hung with portraits of past dukes. In the hall, the household staff stood assembled in a rigid line under the supervision of the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. She wore a severe black gown, her hair scraped back in a tight bun, while a heavy bunch of brass keys clinked against her hip. Her eyes swept over Genevieve, filled with the deep disdain reserved for a cheap substitute, a mere pawn traded for debt. "Good morning, Miss Harlow," Mrs. Gable said coldly, deliberately using her maiden name instead of addressing her as my lady or your grace. "News from London travels swiftly to the north. Although the servants of Ravenscroft reside far from the capital, we know well who is officially betrothed to his grace. A veiled substitute bride entering a carriage to clear a family debt is indeed a spectacle rarely seen." Whispers of malice and doubt immediately rippled through the row of housemaids behind her. They cast scornful glances at Genevieve, viewing her as a mere opportunist. Mrs. Gable added with patronizing condescension, "Here at Ravenscroft we only serve those who are worthy. Do not expect us to bow to an untitled impostor. Keep to your chambers and do not interfere with the management of the estate." Without a single tremor, Genevieve stood straight, her ash-gray eyes gazing calmly at the housekeeper. The cold neglect she had endured for years from her stepmother Evelyn had tempered her spirit. She raised her chin, her voice sharp and resolute. "Gable, my legal status is that of the Duchess of Ravenscroft. I did not come here to beg for charity. Your duty is to manage the staff, not to judge your superiors based on gossip. If you find yourself unable to respect my station, I am certain His Grace will have no hesitation in finding a new housekeeper who understands her place." Mrs. Gable's color drained, her lips pressing together in fury, yet she could find no words to counter the charge. The servants behind her fell into an instant silence, bowing their heads to avoid her gaze. Giving them no further opportunity to speak, Genevieve walked directly to the Duke's study. The previous night, Alistair had granted her permission to examine the estate's financial records to clarify the suspicious deficits of the family. The spacious East Wing study was cast in shadow, filled with the scent of aged leather and cold hearth ashes. In stark contrast to the tidy rows of antique volumes on the shelves, the financial ledgers lay in disarray across a grand mahogany desk. Dust-laden invoices, timber shipping receipts, and debt ledgers lay scattered, the result of years of neglect by the previous land agent before his dismissal. Genevieve drew a heavy oak chair closer to the desk, pushing up the sleeves of her gray woolen dress to begin her task. She sorted the ledgers by year, establishing a double-entry bookkeeping system she had learned from her late father. The steady scratching of her quill filled the quiet room. To her, numbers were the only honest things in the world. Humans might lie, but figures never did. With single-minded focus, she began cross-referencing the agricultural expenses of the western lands with the timber receipts from the east. Genevieve's brow furrowed as she uncovered a grave discrepancy in the records. The reports noted an expenditure of £3,000 for repairs on the southern dam over the past 2 years, but the invoices for materials were issued by a stone quarry belonging to Henry Vance Alistair's scheming cousin, with quantities that failed to match reality. Even the family's lights and pin money allocations and carriage expenses had been inflated to double the London market rates, all bearing Henry Vance's signature of approval. A £2,000 deficit from fabricated grain purchases. £1,500 for a non-existent road project. Genevieve murmured, her slender fingers sweeping across the columns of figures, performing complex calculations in her head with astonishing speed. She rapidly jotted down the exact deficits on a fresh sheet of parchment, clearly tracing the source of the stolen funds. She remained unaware that behind the ajar oak door, Alistair Vance stood watching in silence from the shadows. The Duke loomed tall in his dark woolen overcoat, his deep blue eyes fixed upon his substitute wife. He had half expected her to weep over the servant's hostility, or to flatter him to secure her position. Yet Genevieve did nothing of the sort. She simply worked in quiet resolve. The warm glow of the oil lamp caught her focused features, illuminating ash-gray eyes bright with keen intellect, exuding a quiet strength that commanded his unspoken respect. The total deficit embezzled by Henry Vance amounts to £8,400, Genevieve murmured, laying down her quill. He took advantage of the Duke's deployment at Waterloo to forge invoices through shell companies. If this is not halted, Ravenscroft will face financial ruin before the season even begins. £8,400, a deep voice murmured from the doorway. Genevieve turned, startled. Alistair stepped forward from the shadows, his angular features and the long scar along his cheek appearing all the more commanding under the lamplight. He looked down at the neat calculations she had just completed. The chaotic records of the past 5 years had been brought into perfect order, pinpointing the exact method by which Henry Vance had bled the family coffers. A rare astonishment stirred within the Duke, a man renowned for his icy composure. 2 auditors from London had thrown up their hands in despair over these cleverly falsified ledgers, yet this substitute bride had unraveled the entire deception in a single afternoon. Alistair lifted the sheet of parchment, his voice quiet but intense. "How did you uncover these discrepancies so quickly?" Genevieve replied with calm confidence. Henry Vance was greedy, but he was also indolent. He forged the invoices, but did not bother to alter the names of the shell companies, assuming no one would possess the patience to cross-reference them. My father taught me that while men may fabricate their feelings, numbers remain consistent. Follow the arithmetic, and the deceit will inevitably reveal itself. Alistair studied her in silence for a long moment. The coldness in his eyes gradually softened, replaced by a deep, silent admiration for his substitute wife's brilliant intellect. She was not merely a temporary shield against society's gossip. She was the sharp companion Ravenscroft desperately needed to survive its impending ruin. "You have done remarkably well, Genevieve," Alistair said, setting the parchment down, his tone carrying a note of fierce protection. "From this moment you have absolute authority over the financial ledgers of Ravenscroft Manor. No one shall interfere, least of all Mrs. Gable. As for those who have dared to look down upon you, I shall see to it that they bow." Genevieve allowed herself a quiet, proud smile. Her battle to secure her position in her new home had only just begun. Chapter 4. Lamplight and chamomile tea. The howling wind of a Yorkshire winter storm shrieked against the Gothic window panes of Ravenscroft Manor. The night was late, and the estate was steeped in profound silence. Only the study of Duke Alistair Vance remained dimly illuminated, a solitary circle of light cast by the argand lamp upon the dark oak writing desk. Genevieve Harlow rubbed her hands together, seeking a trace of warmth. She wore a simple grey woolen gown, her slender shoulders draped only in a thin shawl. Although the hearth fire had long since died down to a few smoldering embers, she remained awake. Her ash-grey eyes were fixed upon the massive ledger of the estate. Prior to entering this substitute marriage, Genevieve had known that Ravenscroft stood on the precipice of financial ruin. Yet, inspecting the disorganized records firsthand, she realized the true severity of the situation. The revenues and expenditures had been deliberately convoluted. Under the dim, flickering lamplight, she squinted at the wheat tax entries from the northern farm, carefully noting the discrepancies in her notebook with a quill. Her fingers were frozen, stiffened by the biting northern chill. "Do you intend to freeze yourself to death before you discover the truth?" The low, resonant voice shattered the stillness. Genevieve looked up. Duke Alistair Vance stood there, though she had not heard him enter. He wore a white silk shirt, its collar undone, and dark breeches. His sharp, angular features were half submerged in the shadows, leaving only his deep, piercing blue eyes fixed intently upon her. Over his arm was draped a heavy black woolen cloak, trimmed with thick fox fur. Alistair stepped forward, draping his own woolen cloak over her shoulders. Immediate warmth enveloped Genevieve. The garment was remarkably heavy, carrying the subtle scents of cedarwood and faint tobacco. The sudden warmth threw her into a quiet confusion, her fingers clutching the edge of the fabric. "Thank you, Your Grace, however. Your study is indeed somewhat drafty," Genevieve replied, keeping her voice composed. Had you the mind to summon a servant for more coal, the room would not resemble an ice house, Alistair said, seating himself in the chair opposite her and pulling the lamp to the center of the desk between them. I have no desire for the servants to whisper that the Duke of Ravenscroft allows his wife to freeze to death over estate ledgers. Genevieve allowed herself a faint smile. They already whisper far worse things about this marriage, Your Grace. A few rumors regarding the lack of heating will hardly add to your infamy. Alistair's gaze swept over her pale face and the dark circles beneath her eyes. He noted the stubborn resilience of the woman before him. She would rather endure the bitter cold than ever deign to ask for assistance. What have you discovered? He asked. Genevieve turned the ledger toward him, pointing to a page covered in dense figures. This is the expenditure report for the northern farm. Over the past 3 years, the maintenance costs for the granaries have doubled, yet the actual wheat yield has steadily declined. It is entirely absurd. Alistair leaned forward to follow her gaze. As the distance between them closed, she caught the scent of leather from his signet ring and felt the faint warmth of his breath brush against the back of her hand. Are they inflating the expenses to line their own pockets? He inquired. They are employing double-entry bookkeeping tricks, she explained. The inflated costs are used to conceal the grain being smuggled out and sold illicitly without tax declaration. And the man who authorized these fraudulent expenditures is none other than Lord Henry Vance. Alistair's eyes narrowed with arctic cold. Henry possesses remarkable patience. He assumes I am merely a blunt soldier. He is mistaken, Genevieve said. We need only alter the supervision of the grain carriage routes to sever this pipeline, rather than permitting the local bailiff to manage it independently. You ought to retain an independent solicitor from London to oversee the coming harvest. Furthermore, you should reduce the land rent for the tenant farmers by 5%. Alistair arched an eyebrow. Reduce the rents. You wish me to diminish my own revenue. A 5% reduction in rent will afford the tenant farmers the incentive to invest in superior seed. The yield next season will undoubtedly increase by at least 15%. Your actual revenue will be far greater than if you maintain high rents only to be bled dry by intermediaries. Alistair stared at the young woman opposite him. Her sharp intellect far exceeded that of the debutantes, who did nothing but embroider and smile through a London season. She shone with an exceptional mathematical mind, requiring no protector, for her intellect was her most formidable weapon. Your mind is indeed a dangerous thing, Genevieve, Alistair murmured, speaking her name aloud in a low register. Genevieve's heart skipped a beat, averting her gaze. She bent over the topographical map at the corner of the desk to illustrate her point. Alistair also reached out to steady the edge of the map. Their fingers inadvertently brushed against one another. A sudden, warm jolt traveled up Genevieve's spine. Her hand was icy, whereas Alistair's was warm, calloused from his years on the battlefield. Both froze. At such close proximity, she could clearly see to the long scar tracing his left cheek. Alistair did not withdraw his hand but instead held her gaze. The cold caution that usually guarded him seemed to melt away under the narrow beam of the lamp. Genevieve drew her hand back, her cheeks flushing. Forgive me, Your Grace. Alistair slowly withdrew his hand, his fingers curling slightly as if to retain the lingering cool of her touch. Noticing her rubbing her temples in exhaustion, his voice softened. You are fatigued. The night is late and the ledgers can wait until tomorrow. I am merely a little strained, Genevieve sighed. In London, when I worked late with my father, I would drink a cup of warm chamomile tea to soothe my nerves. But at Ravenscroft, everyone drinks only strong black tea. No matter, I shall finish this and retire. Alistair said nothing more. He rose, gathered his cloak, and stepped out. His tall silhouette vanished into the shadowed stone corridor. Genevieve watched him leave, shaking her head at her own foolish sensitivity, before returning to her bedchamber in the East Tower. 2 days later, on a cold, drizzling afternoon, Genevieve was compiling a catalogue of documents in the library when Gable, the steward, entered. In his hand he carried a small, round tin box wrapped in wax paper, emitting a sweet, soothing aroma. Your Grace, this is a parcel that the Duke specifically requested to be delivered post-haste from Wales. It arrived at the estate this morning, and he charged me to bring it to you without delay. Genevieve opened the tin, astonished to find pale yellow, dried chamomile blossoms that exuded a pure, clean fragrance. This was a premium organic Welsh chamomile tea of exceeding rarity. Accompanying it was a note in Alistair's hand. I have no wish to see a librarian ruin my ledgers due to a headache. Drink this during your nightly labors. R. A warm smile touched the corners of her lips. His words remained characteristically blunt, yet this silent gesture of concern carried a strangely exquisite tenderness. He had remembered her every word, and had taken it upon himself to place the order. That evening Genevieve sat once more over the ledgers in the study, a steaming cup of warm chamomile tea resting beside the oil lamp. The door creaked open and Alistair entered. His eyes flicked over the teacup and the cloak she had obediently draped over her shoulders. "Is the tea to your liking?" he asked as he sat down. "It is excellent, Your Grace. It makes Ravenscroft feel far warmer," Alistair nodded, his gaze lingering on her face a moment longer than was his custom. Amidst the delicate scent of chamomile, the chasm between two solitary souls seemed to narrow. The battle to reclaim justice lay long before them, but tonight they knew they did not stand alone. Chapter 5: The Yorkshire Country Ball. The Yorkshire blizzard howled outside Ravenscroft Manor. Within the warmth of the firelit study, Genevieve Harlow wore her horn-rimmed spectacles, meticulously reviewing the financial ledgers. Her mathematical acumen had just helped Alistair discover that over 30% of the estate's budget had been depleted, embezzled by Henry Vance. This audit of the ledger books was also her sole opportunity to search for clues regarding the suspicious death of her father. The door opened, and Alistair Vance entered, the towering, imposing stature of the former cavalry officer casting a long shadow across the room. The long scar across his cheekbone stood out sharply in the firelight of the hearth. He placed a gilded invitation upon the desk. "The winter ball for the Yorkshire gentry at Thorndyke Manor is tonight. I require you to accompany me in your capacity as the Duchess." Genevieve looked down at the invitation, her eyelashes trembling slightly. "Your Grace, the appearance of a shunned substitute bride from London such as myself will only invite useless gossip upon you." "It is not a request, Genevieve. Your standing is determined by me, not by country squires or London gossip rags. Put on your finest gown." Genevieve pressed her lips together. Her finest gown was merely a simple emerald satin dress, devoid of ornate embroidery, a meager relic she had managed to keep after her stepmother stripped away her dowry. Yet she felt no self-pity. Standing tall, she looked directly into his eyes. "I understand. Your Grace, I shall prepare." Alistair slid a small velvet box toward her. "The Ravenscroft emeralds. Wear them. The woman who stands beside me shall not be looked down upon by anyone." Out in the corridor, Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, stared at the heirloom emerald necklace around Genevieve's neck in utter astonishment, but under Alistair's bone-chilling glare, she hastily bowed her head and retreated. The carriage bearing the falcon crest of Ravenscroft rumbled through the foggy Yorkshire night. Inside, a heavy silence reigned. Genevieve sat opposite Alistair, her worn woolen cloak partially concealing the emerald gown and the sparkling heirloom necklace. Alistair sat quietly, observing her composure, her hand slightly tightened around her ivory dancing card, portraying no sign of fear. "Tonight, Baron Thorndyke and the local debutantes will seek to isolate you due to your status as a substitute bride," Alistair said in a low, gravelly voice. Genevieve raised her eyes. "I am well acquainted with the coldness of London, Your Grace. A Yorkshire storm will not make me falter. So long as you do not doubt me, others cannot cause me harm." Alistair did not reply, but his hand, bearing his signet ring, tightened slightly upon the silver head of his walking stick, a flicker of respect passing through his eyes. Thorndyke Manor blazed with light amidst the dark, desolate moors. As they alighted from the carriage, Alistair immediately offered his sturdy arm for her to take, the warmth of his touch helping to banish the biting northern chill. As they crossed the threshold of the grand ballroom, the lively atmosphere abruptly ground to a halt. A heavy silence rippled through the room as the crowd recognized the Duke of Ravenscroft entering with Genevieve Harlow. Snippets of mocking whispers arose throughout the hall, gossiping about the jilted substitute bride from London. Alistair murmured, "I must proceed to the smoking room to discuss land matters with Thorndyke." "Remain here, and remember you are a Ravenscroft." While Alistair met with Baron Thorndyke in the smoking room, Genevieve stood alone by a marble column. The local debutantes isolated her, casting venomous whispers regarding her cheap, substitute origin. Clara Thorndyke, the host's daughter, smirked at her empty dancing card. "Welcome, our substitute Duchess. With a card as blank as this, I fear no gentleman will deign to ask you for a turn about the room." Her mother, Lady Thorndyke, added with patronizing condescension, "You ought to have remained in some dusty, dark chamber at Ravenscroft instead of coming here to cast a pall over the festivities." Genevieve's color drained, yet her spine remained perfectly straight, her ash-gray eyes behind her Florentine spectacles remaining as still as undisturbed water. She responded with cool composure, "I attend this evening as the Duke's lawful wife. An empty dancing card does not speak to my honor, but your mockery certainly attests to a severe lack of breeding in our hosts." A simple gown remains far nobler than grand attire draped over a malicious soul. Clara Thorndyke flushed crimson, her grip tightening on her folding fan. The musicians began to play, signaling the opening waltz. By protocol, the first dance belonged to the highest-ranking noble present, the Duke of Ravenscroft. Clara Thorndyke immediately stepped toward the center of the floor, confident that he would invite her to dance to maintain social etiquette. Yet Alistair emerged from the study, walking right past the breath-held crowd. He completely ignored Clara, striding directly toward the corner of the room where Genevieve stood. To the utter astonishment of the assembly, the cold Duke of Ravenscroft bowed before her in the most formal and respectful manner. Removing his black leather glove, he extended his large, warm hand to her. "Miss Genevieve," Alistair's voice was low, yet it carried clearly across the room. "May I have the honor of leading the Duchess of Ravenscroft in this opening waltz?" The ballroom fell into a stunned silence. Clara Thorndyke stood frozen, her face completely drained of color. The Duke's public choice of the socially shunned substitute bride to open the ball was the most formidable defense of her honor he could declare. Genevieve smiled, placing her small hand in his. "The honor is entirely mine, Your Grace." They stepped onto the floor as the sweet strain of violins arose. Alistair placed his hand upon her waist, warmth immediately diffusing through the silk of her gown. He guided her into the sweeping rhythmic turns of the waltz. In such close proximity, Genevieve could feel the solid strength of his chest and the warm, deep scent of cedarwood on his coat. She looked up at him, her ash-gray eyes shining beneath the candlelight. "You acquitted yourself exceptionally well," Alistair murmured close to her ear, his grip tightening around her waist, drawing her closer in a swift, practiced turn to shield her from prying eyes. "But from this moment forth, you need not stand alone against them. Leave it to me." Genevieve's heart skipped a beat, a warm sensation spread through her. The Duke's usual icy reserve seemed to melt away. The spinning waltz swept them into a world of their own, where only they existed and a profound, silent understanding began to bloom. Behind his armor of iron was the most tender, reliable shelter she had known since her father's death. When the dance concluded, Alistair kept a firm grasp on her hand as he escorted her to the seats of honor, his sharp gaze sweeping the room so that all who had gossiped immediately bowed their heads in apprehension. Alistair took his own dark, heavy wool cloak and gently draped it over Genevieve's bare, slightly shivering shoulders, before the astonished gaze of the entire room. This elegant gesture of protection silently asserted an unbreakable bond. She looked up slightly, smiling through her Florentine spectacles, and Alistair acknowledged her with a subtle nod. Their relationship, which had begun as a cold substitute marriage settlement, had now been warmed by a deep understanding, and bond forged through the sweet strains of the waltz amidst the northern blizzard. Chapter 6, Arsenic Ink. The Yorkshire howled outside the tall windows of the Ravenscroft Manor Library. Within, the hearth fire flickered, casting a small warm halo of light amidst the room lined with ancient bookshelves. Genevieve Harlow stood alone before the massive mahogany writing desk. Rested upon it was the worn mahogany chest containing the effects of her late father, which Alistair had secretly brought back from London. She traced her fingers along the wood, a wave of suffocating grief washing over her. Her father, the scholarly Earl of Harlow, had passed away so suddenly, leaving her to face a merciless storm of slander. Genevieve set to work, carefully sorting through her father's unfinished translation manuscripts. As she lifted his heavy brass inkwell and pen box, she noticed an unusual seam along its wooden base. Pressing a small catch at the corner, she heard a soft click. A false bottom slid open, revealing a slender journal bound in dark brown leather, along with a packet of letters secured with a frayed ribbon. This was the diary of her father's final days, the very record Lady Evelyn claimed had been lost after his demise. With trembling hands, Genevieve opened the journal. The elegant handwriting of the early pages gave way, towards the end, to a jagged, erratic script disjointed and weak. She adjusted her Florence spectacles, squinting in the dim light to read each agonizing entry. May 12th, the tremors in my right hand have grown severe. Today I found myself unable to even hold a silver spoon at breakfast. My fingertips are entirely numb, devoid of sensation when I touch the parchment. This lingering languor is slowly draining my very life. May 20th, a searing heat consumes my chest like an invisible fire when night falls. Evelyn remains most attentive in her care. She insists I use a special bottle of ink she brought from London to complete my translations. She claims it contains a rare preservative to prevent the script from fading. Yet whenever I write, my index finger turns a dark bruised hue, and a deep throbbing ache penetrates the bone. June 3rd. I grow highly suspicious of that ink. It bears a strange coal tar odor, pungent and leaving a bizarre metallic violet sheen when dry. Whenever I attempt to discard it, Evelyn discovers my intent and flies into a rage, forcing me to use it. I no longer possess the strength to argue with her. My hand spasms constantly, my body is dying. A stifled sob escaped Genevieve's throat, her tears staining the yellowed parchment. As a scholar, the symptoms described were sickeningly familiar: the tremors, the numbness, the wasting weakness, and the burning abdominal pain. These were the textbook signs of chronic arsenic poisoning. Her father had been slowly poisoned by Lady Evelyn, the arsenic mixed into his very ink, absorbing into his flesh month after month. With frantic haste, she unfolded the letters hidden in the secret compartment. It was a missive from Lady Evelyn to Lord Henry Vance. "Henry, the arsenic powder you sent in the carriage shipment is working marvelously. The Earl of Harlow has begun to fail. His hand trembles so severely he cannot sign any new deeds. I shall force him to sign blank transfers of the estate management before the poison claims him entirely. Arrange your men to take over the antiquities trade." And the reply from Henry Vance: "Evelyn, see to it that the matter is handled cleanly. That wretched girl Genevieve must not suspect anything in the study. She possesses too much knowledge of ancient texts, and might recognize the alteration of the ink's hue. Should she grow suspicious, accuse her of stealing the antiquities to have her banished from London. Once she is socially ruined, her word in a court of law will be utterly worthless." Genevieve stood abruptly, her entire frame trembling with cold fury. They had not only murdered her father to seize his estate, but they had also plotted her ruin to silence her forever. Clutching to the diary and the letters to her chest, she fled the library, running toward Alistair's private chambers in the West Wing. She burst through the heavy oak door of his study without knocking. Alistair sat behind his desk, the hearth fire glinting off his cold silver mask. Her sudden appearance, face stained with tears, brought him instantly to his feet, a rare flash of concern in his eyes. "Genevieve, what has occurred? Why are you trembling so, Alistair?" "My father, he was murdered." Genevieve choked out, her voice faltering from the sheer weight of her grief. She thrust the journal and letters toward him. "Lady Evelyn and Henry Vance, they used arsenic in his ink to kill him." Alistair took the papers from her hand. His face hardened to ice as he read the late Earl's trembling words and the damning correspondence. His gray eyes narrowed dangerously, his black-gloved hands gripping the edges of the parchment, until his knuckles surely whitened beneath the leather. A cold, lethal rage toward Henry Vance and the wicked stepmother flared within him. He looked up to meet Genevieve's eyes. She stood before him, her shoulders shaking as she tried to suppress her sobs. Alistair stepped forward, removing his own heavy black wool cloak and draping it gently over her fragile shoulders. The weight of it wrapped her in a profound sense of safety amidst the storm. "Do not fear, Genevieve," Alistair spoke, his voice low yet carrying an unyielding command. "From this moment you are under the protection of Ravenscroft. No one shall dare touch you here." He looked deeply into her tear-filled, ash-gray eyes. "This murderous plot was not aimed solely at your father. Once they realize you possess this journal and begin to investigate, your life will be in immediate peril. They are ruthless, and they will stop at nothing to silence a witness. I will not allow you to face them alone." Alistair turned and pulled the bell cord sharply to summon the butler. "Finch." When the butler entered with a worried expression, Alistair commanded him with the decisive authority of a military officer. "Finch, remove Miss Genevieve's belongings from the East Tower immediately. She is to be housed in the chambers adjacent to my own in the West Wing. Post guards at her door round the clock. Let all her food and drink be strictly inspected." Finch bowed low, his expression solemn. "I understand, Your Grace. I shall see to it immediately." Alistair turned back to Genevieve, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "Finch, send an express courier to London tonight. Instruct Solicitor Abernathy to come to Yorkshire post-haste, before tomorrow evening, with all legal files. We shall launch a full inquiry and bring this case before the Chancery Court. I will see them brought to justice." Genevieve accepted a warm glass of water, feeling the heat seep into her hands, easing the icy dread in her chest. She knew the path to claim justice for her father would be fraught with danger. Yet, standing beside this resolute man, she believed that the darkness must finally yield to the light of truth. Chapter 7: The Ravenscroft Settlement. The Yorkshire blizzard howled relentlessly outside Ravenscroft Manor. A biting frost, carrying a bone-chilling cold, rattled against the tall windows of the Grand Library in the West Wing. Inside, the hearth crackled with a warm, roaring fire, shielding the room from the winter's fury. Alistair Vance stood motionless beside the heavy mahogany desk. The silver mask covering half of his face caught the dancing flames, lending an even colder gleam to the Duke's piercing gray eyes. Spread across the desk, the documents detailing the late Earl Harlow's demise lay beside the worn journal of Genevieve's father. Genevieve Harlow sat quietly in the leather armchair near the hearth, her slender fingers tightly laced to mask a slight tremor. Behind her Florentine spectacles, her eyes bore the weight of exhaustion from a night of facing brutal truths, yet they still burned with an unyielding resolve. Mr. Abernathy, the family's long-serving solicitor, peered intently through his spectacles, carefully scrutinizing the legal documents. The heavy silence was suddenly shattered by a frantic knocking at the door. Finch, the butler, entered, his face pale as he reported, "Your Grace, there is trouble. Lord Henry Vance and Lady Evelyn Harlow have arrived, leading the local sheriff and a band of constables into the Great Hall. They demand the arrest of Miss Genevieve for the theft of the ancient Tudor Bible." Genevieve flinched, her shoulders trembling slightly. Alistair remained completely composed. He placed a steady hand upon her shoulder to reassure her, and the warmth of his palm immediately stilled her rising panic. "Do not fear," Alistair said in a low, resonant tone. "Come with me. Let us see what they dare attempt under the roof of Ravenscroft." He led her down the grand marble staircase. The scarred Duke's cold, commanding presence caused the constables in the hall to immediately lower their heads in fear. In the great hall, Henry Vance and Evelyn Harlow waited with triumphant sneers. Sheriff Higgins stood trembling, holding a parchment warrant stamped with the red wax seal of the London court. Henry spoke with mocking satisfaction, declaring they had come to see justice served, while Evelyn demanded that Genevieve be shackled for stealing a priceless family heirloom and fleeing. When Higgins stepped forward to demand her custody, Alistair stood tall and unyielding in front of Genevieve, shielding her completely from their hostile gazes before issuing a cold command, "Hand me the warrant." Higgins offered the parchment with trembling hands. Alistair took it, cast a brief glance, and with absolute finality tore it down the middle before their eyes, letting the pieces flutter onto the stone floor. Henry shrieked in outrage, "Your Grace! Do you dare defy a court warrant?" A low growl from Alistair silenced his cousin instantly. The Duke turned a freezing glare upon the sheriff. "Higgins, have you forgotten that I am the Lord Lieutenant of Yorkshire? No warrant from London holds sway within Ravenscroft unless it bears my signature. Lay a single finger upon what is mine, and I shall strip you of your badge and throw you into the dungeons before the hour is out." Terrified, Higgins bowed and scrambled back, prompting Evelyn to hiss in fury, accusing the Duke of harboring a common thief. Genevieve stepped out from behind Alistair, lifting her sharp gaze to look her stepmother straight in the eye, her voice ringing clear and resolute. "Whom do you call a thief? The Tudor Bible is the lawful heritage of my father, and I am his sole heir. The true thief in this room is the one who used vile schemes to poison my father and steal his estate." Evelyn's composure slipped, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she quickly masked it. "You, how dare you utter such slander?" Sensing the tide turning against them, Henry Vance pulled Evelyn back by the arm, uttering a parting threat that they would obtain a writ from the Lord Chancellor and return to seize her. Alistair ignored them entirely, coldly commanding Finch to escort them off the estate. Once they had departed into the raging blizzard, Genevieve turned to the Duke, expressing that she had no wish to bring ruin upon him and suggesting she should take her leave. Alistair stayed her, asserting that she could not possibly survive the wilderness alone while her enemies hunted her. Mr. Abernathy then offered a counsel. To ensure her absolute safety under English law, she required an unassailable station. Sensing Genevieve's hesitation, Alistair looked directly at her, his voice low and firm, "A marriage settlement between you and me." Genevieve rose from her chair in sheer disbelief, unable to comprehend why a noble duke would offer to wed a woman branded as a thief. Alistair explained that under the law of coverture, once she became the Duchess of Ravenscroft, she would be completely shielded under his legal identity, rendering all pending charges null and void. The title of Duchess of Ravenscroft is the most formidable shield. It will allow you to walk among the London ton with head held high, standing as an equal to Evelyn Harlow to reclaim what is yours. You require this title for your vengeance, and I require your mind to expose Henry Vance's treachery. It is a fair exchange. Genevieve studied Alistair. She was no naive debutante. The harshness of the world had taught her to look at matters practically. This title would completely reverse her humiliated standing. Taking a steadying breath, she replied, "Very well. I accept, however, I wish to negotiate the specific terms in detail with Mr. Abernathy as our witness." Alistair nodded with satisfaction and gestured for her to be seated. Abernathy immediately spread a fresh sheet of parchment across the desk, preparing the quill and ink. Genevieve spoke with quiet determination. First clause, I require a yearly pin money of £2,000. Managed by Mr. Abernathy through an independent trust, I shall have sole authority over these funds to build the case for my father, entirely free from the interference of the Vance family. Alistair agreed without hesitation. I shall direct the revenues from my western estate into the trust, ensuring the pin money is paid in full each quarter. Second clause, Genevieve continued, regarding the antiquities and the Harlow Library. When we reclaim the estate from Evelyn, my father's entire library and his collection of artifacts must remain my sole, independent property. The House of Vance shall have no claim upon them. Alistair raised an eyebrow, quietly impressed by her sharp mind and devotion. Agreed, the House of Ravenscroft shall assist you in recovering it, claiming no share for ourselves. And the final clause, Genevieve said, her voice steady. This shall be a marriage in name only, contracted for protection and retribution. There shall be no conjugal relations between us, save by mutual consent. Alistair silently regarded his proud librarian bride. We have a settlement, he murmured, extending his hand. Genevieve signed her name, Genevieve Harlow, in a graceful slanting hand. Beside hers hemmed his signature, Alistair Vance, Duke of Ravenscroft. Mr. Abernathy pressed the brass seal into the hot red wax, leaving the falcon crest that legalized their union. Alistair rose, producing a deep blue sapphire ring, and slipped it onto her ring finger. The sapphire gleamed, a brilliant declaration of her new standing. Alistair looked deep into her eyes, his voice warm and deep. From this day forth, you are the Duchess of Ravenscroft. No warrant shall touch you, no insult shall reach you. I shall stand by you to reclaim justice. Genevieve touched the ring, a strange warmth seeping into her heart amidst the freezing winter night. Looking at the silver-masked Duke, a profound sense of trust welled up within her. This marriage was the turning point that would lead her out of the shadows, ready to face the London ton and bring the guilty to ruin. Chapter 8. Preparing the Trap. The Ravenscroft carriage rattled over the cobblestones leading to London, the harsh Yorkshire blizzard receding into the distance to make way for a dreary grey fog. Throughout the long journey, Genevieve Harlow and Alistair Vance remained enveloped in a heavy silence, the rhythmic, urgent beat of horses' hooves the only sound echoing within the carriage. Genevieve gazed down at the deep blue sapphire ring gracing her finger. Though she was now, by all legal rights, the Duchess of Ravenscroft, she could not suppress a cold dread at the prospect of returning to London. This was the very city that had so cruelly humiliated her, the stronghold of the enemies who had driven her beloved father to an untimely grave. Across from her, Alistair reclined against the velvet cushions, his silver mask catching the dim carriage light. Observing the tight, tense clasp of her hands, he silently spread a warm wool blanket over her lap to ward off the chill it restrained, yet fiercely protective gesture. As night descended, the carriage drew to a halt before the grand Mayfair townhouse. The household staff welcomed them with profound, hushed reverence. Alistair escorted Genevieve inside, stepping over the threshold to prepare for the final, decisive confrontation. Inside the study, Solicitor Abernathy stood waiting beside a heavy writing desk piled high with legal documents. He bowed respectfully as the couple entered. Your Grace, my Lady, Abernathy began, his voice low. The Marquis of Ashley's ball takes place tomorrow evening. We must have every piece of legal evidence fully secured before we reveal our hand. Genevieve immediately stepped toward the desk. Mr. Abernathy, pray show me the ledgers and receipts from the Thorn Gallery. That is our first link. Abernathy handed her a sheaf of yellowed papers. These are the receipts for the heirlooms sold by Lady Evelyn under the alias of Mr. Green. The proceeds were transferred directly into her account in Mayfair, all to settle her mounting gambling debts. Genevieve compared the papers, her eyes narrowing. The Tudor Bible, the Elizabethan silver platters, and my father's portrait are all part of the entailed estate, strictly forbidden from sale. To charge her with smuggling, we require proof of transport. Alistair placed a signed document onto the desk. This is the sworn deposition of Captain Briggs, master of the Seahawk. He has confessed to receiving £300 from Lady Evelyn to smuggle the antiquities to France. This deposition is ironclad, Abernathy agreed, nodding grimly. Lady Evelyn will have no room for denial, and what of the promissory note for £100,000 produced by Henry Vance? Alistair inquired, his tone cold. Genevieve positioned the forged promissory note beside the late Duke's personal journal under a magnifying lens. Henry Vance claims this bears your father's signature, but the ink itself betrays his lie. She pointed through the lens. True Tudor ink is iron gall, which naturally oxidizes to a warm brown over the centuries. This signature, however, was written with modern carbon ink, remaining stark and black. It is clear that Henry Vance forged this document entirely to seize control of Ravenscroft. Abernethy gasped, his eyes wide, brilliant. This is a most formidable proof, impossible to refute. Alistair looked at his librarian wife, the corner of his mouth curving into a rare, subtle smile. Her sharp intellect was indeed their most formidable weapon. By 2 a.m, Abernethy retired to the drawing room to draft the formal indictment. The study fell quiet, leaving only Alistair and Genevieve in the warmth of the crackling fireplace, the steady patter of rain brushing against the window panes. Genevieve removed her spectacles, rubbing her temples to soothe her exhaustion. A small glass of warm sherry was quietly set before her. "Drink," Alistair murmured. "It will ease your mind for sleep." Genevieve accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you, Your Grace." Alistair took a seat opposite her, under the dancing firelight. His silver mask cast a crimson reflection, while the unmasked half of his face appeared remarkably softened. "You have worked tirelessly throughout our journey," Alistair said, his voice low. "Your resilience astounds me. Most young ladies of the ton would have crumpled under such vicious slander, yet you stand firm." Genevieve took a slow sip of the warm wine, gazing into the hearth. Her voice grew quiet, drifting back to a dark and painful memory. Once one has tasted the absolute depths of solitude, tears become the most useless of luxuries. After my father passed, my stepmother Evelyn falsely accused me of theft solely to ruin my reputation and seize my inheritance. Her voice faltered slightly, a tremor passing through her. Evelyn locked me in the attic for 3 agonizing months, the door nailed shut. Every day I was given nothing but stale bread and cold water. Upon hearing the scandal, my betrothed, Beverly, immediately severed our engagement to betroth himself to my stepsister, bringing, with her, the dowry stolen from my father. I survived only by reading the ancient volumes my father had hidden beneath my mattress, swearing to myself that I would make them answer for what they had done. Alistair remained silent, his dark eyes shadowing at the cruelty and isolation endured by a woman betrayed by her own kin. He reached up, his gloved fingers touching the cold edge of his silver mask, a rare, hesitant gesture. "I too once believed I would never look upon the light again," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register as he bared a scar that had festered in his soul for a decade. 10 years ago on the field of Waterloo," he murmured. "It was a hell of mud, blood, and thundering cannon fire. I was a proud, foolish young officer then, and my younger brother Julian followed me. In the decisive clash, our unit was surrounded. Believing I could breach the enemy line, I ordered a desperate charge." His voice shook with repressed grief. "It was a fatal, catastrophic mistake. An artillery shell exploded beside us, throwing Julian to the ground. I lunged to shield him, and the shrapnel tore away half my face. But that physical torment was nothing compared to the agony of watching my brother draw his final, gasping breath. Before he died, Julian pressed the Ravenscroft registry into my hands, pleading with me to guard the family name from those who would consume it. He tapped the silver mask. This cold metal is the testament of my failure. I survived, but my soul perished with Julian. Upon returning to London, I assumed this mask to hide my ruin, withdrawing entirely from the ton and condemning myself to 10 years of bitter solitude." Alistair turned his gaze to Genevieve, a profound gentleness softening his eyes. "Until you crossed my threshold, you did not recoil from this mask, nor did you heed the monstrous rumors. Instead, you brought life back to Ravenscroft with your fierce intellect. For the first time in a decade, I feel the warmth of the living world." Genevieve sat in quiet awe of his confession. She felt a profound, undeniable resonance between their 2 scarred souls, one who had been imprisoned in a dark attic, and another who had shuttered himself within a fortress of guilt. She set her glass aside and reached across the space, gently placing her warm palm over his black leather glove. "Your Grace," Genevieve spoke softly, her tone steady. "You did not fail him. You fought with everything you had to shield your brother, and Julian placed his absolute trust in you. This mask is not a mark of penance, but a shield for what is sacred. You are the most honorable gentleman I have ever known, and I am proud to stand as your Duchess." The warmth of her hands seeped into the heart that had been frozen for 10 long years. Alistair turned his hand over, intertwining his fingers with hers. The connection between them had transcended the bounds of a mere marriage settlement, binding 2 kindred spirits prepared to weather any impending storm. Outside, the rain subsided, giving way to the soft light of dawn. Alistair rose, looking out the window as Mayfair began to stir. Genevieve stepped to his side, her spine straight with proud poise. Tonight, at the Marquis of Ashley's ball, Alistair said with cold steel in his voice, we shall spring our trap. Evelyn Harlow and Henry Vance will pay for every misery they have inflicted. I am ready, Your Grace, Genevieve replied, her fingers lightly touching the sapphire band, her eyes steady. We shall reclaim our honor, and we shall have justice. Bathed in the golden light of the London dawn, they stood side by side, resolute and unyielding, ready for the evening's reckoning, where the true Duchess of Ravenscroft would shake the very foundations of the Tun. Chapter 9. The Duke's proclamation. The light from hundreds of beeswax candles, dripping from brilliant crystal chandeliers, bathed the Mayfair ballroom in a golden glow. It was the absolute pinnacle of the London season. Melodic strains of violins drifted from the mezzanine, mingling with the hollow laughter of the Tun and the delicate clinking of crystal glasses. The elite gathered here in their finest silks and satins, yet beneath their glittering facades lay sharp, calculating gazes, ready to tear apart anyone who faltered. This morning's scans sheets had already been filled with malicious whispers about Ravenscroft Manor, and tonight the Mayfair ballroom was where they all waited for the final, ruinous act. Genevieve stood in a shadowed alcove, near a wall draped in heavy dark velvet. She had chosen a simple gown of moss-green silk, without a single gemstone to adorn her throat. Yet her posture was perfectly upright, her calm gray eyes looking directly at the whispering crowd. In her hands, she tightly gripped a thin portfolio bound in parchment, the fruit of sleepless nights spent in the ancient Ravenscroft library. She knew the enemies lurking in the room wished to destroy her honor. But she felt no fear. She had endured their contempt for far too long to run away now. Suddenly the music of the violins seemed to fade. The crowd at the entrance of the ballroom parted, making way for two figures walking in with haughty pride, Lady Evelyn and Henry Vance. Evelyn wore an expensive gown of crimson satin, her head adorned with a towering, arrogant peacock feather. Beside her, Henry Vance toyed with a small silver button on his cuff, a smug, triumphant smile etched across his cunning face. Their eyes swept the ballroom and instantly locked onto Genevieve's solitary figure. Evelyn let out a soft laugh, one that did not reach her cold eyes. She stepped forward, the sharp click of her heels against the polished marble floor echoing slightly, piercing the murmur of the room. Several nobles turned to watch, intense curiosity written across every aristocratic face. Oh, do look who we have here, Evelyn spoke, her tone dripping with venom, deliberately raising her voice to draw the room's attention. A grand soirée, a gathering of the most illustrious bloodlines in England, yet we are graced with the presence of someone who simply does not belong. The gatekeeper should be dismissed immediately, for allowing a common mouse to slip through. Henry Vance stepped forward, standing close beside Evelyn. He looked at Genevieve with sneering disgust. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce a rather extraordinary guest. The woman standing before you, putting on such delicate, noble airs, is in truth nothing but a thief cast out by her own family, now hiding under the guise of a lowly maid at Ravenscroft. A collective gasp rippled through the hall, followed by a torrent of whispers. Cold, disdainful gazes turned in unison toward Genevieve. Malicious gossip spread like wildfire. They whispered to one another that she was a thief, hiding behind the apron of a housemaid to cover her stained past. A thief, hiding as a mere servant. How utterly scandalous. How did she even gain entry? A disgrace to the Tun. Henry Vance pressed on, raising his voice. She stole confidential documents and promissory notes from my family before she was cast out. She believed that playing the servant at Ravenscroft would wash away her sins. But a hand accustomed to theft can never clasp hands with high society. Evelyn nodded in cruel agreement, a creature without so much as a proper calling card, or a valid invitation to Almack's, yet she dares to stand among us. Has your desperate poverty stripped away the last vestige of your decency, Genevieve? Genevieve remained perfectly still, her shoulders straight. Her lips tightened slightly, but when she spoke, her voice was entirely steady. The accusations brought by yourself and Henry Vance are nothing but a clumsy theatrical display. I have stolen nothing, and I do not stand here as a runaway servant. Huh, still playing the martyr, are we? Henry laughed aloud, a sharp grating sound. If you are not a servant, then what, pray tell, are you? A chorus of mocking laughter arose from the nobles, cold and sharp. Humiliation threatened to close in on Genevieve like a wall of ice. But at that exact moment, an abrupt silence swept from the grand entrance. The laughter died instantly, wine glasses remained poised, but not a single soul dared to drink. Alistair Vance, the Duke of Ravenscroft, entered the room. He was dressed in immaculate black, his heavy velvet cloak draped casually over his broad shoulders. His face was cold, carved as if from solid granite. He walked with long, purposeful strides directly toward Genevieve. Arriving before her, Alistair smoothly removed his heavy cloak and draped it over Genevieve's delicate shoulders, wrapping her completely in its warmth. The faint scent of sandalwood enveloped her, bringing an unexpected sense of peace. Alistair turned, stepping directly in front of Genevieve to shield her from view, facing Lady Evelyn and Henry Vance. He stood there, a towering wall of stone protecting her from the storm. "Whom did you just refer to as a lowly servant?" Alistair's voice cut through the air, arctic and dead calm. Evelyn trembled slightly, yet she struggled to maintain her haughty demeanor. "Your Grace, you have been deceived by this girl. She is merely a librarian's assistant, a common thief." Alistair did not allow her to finish. He drew a rolled parchment bearing the red seal of the Church of England, unfurling it before the breathless assembly. "This is a legal marriage certificate, bearing the seal of the Church of England and signed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Genevieve is no servant, she is my wife." The entire ballroom erupted into stunned whispers. Evelyn's face turned white and Henry Vance stood frozen, rooted to the spot. Alistair stared down the two before him, his voice like iron. "My wife owes you no explanations whatsoever. From this day forward, the whole of Ravenscroft, its ancient library, and I myself belong entirely to the Duchess." Genevieve stepped forward to stand at Alistair's side. She opened the portfolio in her hands, her voice clear and resonant. "If Henry Vance and Lady Evelyn wish to speak of theft, then let them look upon these documents." She held up the first page. "This is the original deed of debt. Henry Vance forged my father's signature to fabricate a debt, intending to seize our estate. This forgery has been examined and verified by legal counsel." The murmurs of the crowd shifted, turning their scorn back onto Henry. He went pale, his hands shaking. Genevieve drew a second document. "And here is the inventory of the missing antiquities from Yorkshire. They were smuggled to the continent concealed, in the personal shipping crates of Lady Evelyn, stamped with her own family crest." Lady Evelyn staggered backward, grasping a stone pillar for support as her lace fan clattered to the floor. Alistair raised a hand, signaling his guards. "Remove them. My solicitors will present this evidence to the High Court of Chancery first thing tomorrow morning." The two were escorted out in utter humiliation. Alistair turned to Genevieve, lifting her hand to place a reverent kiss upon her knuckles. One by one, the nobles began to bow, paying their respects to the new Duchess of Ravenscroft. Genevieve stood there, proud and radiant, beside Alistair. She was no longer the penniless librarian scorned by society. She had reclaimed her dignity, publicly and completely under the protection and love of the most powerful man in Ravenscroft. Chapter 10. The prime number key and the resolving chest. A thick, grey fog enveloped the Gothic windows of the Ravenscroft townhouse in London. The winter chill whistled through the crevices, seeping into the grand drawing room brilliantly lit by candles, yet filled with a suffocating tension. Today, there was no clamorous trial at the Chancery Court, but rather a private arbitration convened within the townhouse, observed by the Lord Chief Justice Sir John and Mr. Abernethy, the family solicitor. On the opposite settee, Lady Evelyn Harlow sat with rigid, haughty posture, sipping her tea as though she were the true mistress of the estate. Beside her, Henry Vance wore a sinister smirk, tapping his silver-topped cane lightly against the mahogany floorboards, his gaze occasionally darting to the heavy iron chest, positioned at the center of the table. Beverly leaned against a pillar in the background with a nonchalant air, utterly convinced that no one could unravel their design. The ancient iron chest, reinforced with brass bands, which had once been deposited in the Bank of London by the late Earl of Harlow, had now been retrieved by Alistair through the exercise of his ducal authority. Henry Vance sneered with patronizing arrogance, breaking the silence. "Pray, Sir John, for what purpose have you brought this chest here?" It is common knowledge that the late Earl of Harlow secured it with a complex combination lock. Any crude attempt to pry it open or strike it with a hammer will trigger the internal glass vial of sulfuric acid, destroying every document the combination died with him. Do you truly intend to accuse us with nothing but a hollow iron box? Lady Evelyn lightly stroked her feather fan, chiming in with a mocking sneer. "Genevieve, you insolent girl, do you truly think you can open it? Your father was a dotard, his mind consumed day in and day out by meaningless numbers. If even I do not know the combination, how could an outcast like you possibly know it? Do not waste our time further. Sign the settlement transferring the Harlow estate to Henry Vance." Genevieve stepped forward, attired in a luxurious dark green velvet gown befitting a duchess, her ash-gray eyes calm and entirely unyielding. Alistair Vance stood tall beside her, his gloved hand resting gently at her waist, offering a steady and unwavering support. Allow her to proceed, Alistair said, his voice deep and commanding, instantly cutting through the arrogance of the two opposite them. My wife has every right to decide the destiny of her own house. Genevieve faced the antique iron chest as childhood memories flooded her mind. She remembered the quiet afternoons in her father's old study, where he would smile as he pointed to sheets of paper covered with concentric circles and numbers. My beloved Genevieve, her father's warm voice seemed to whisper in her ear, mathematics is the language of the universe, and prime numbers are the unbreakable foundation. The lock of this chest is a key to safeguard the truth. Remember the sequence of twin primes you and I so dearly loved. Genevieve let out a soft sigh, placing her slender fingers upon the 5 brass dials on the lid of the chest. She softly murmured the mathematical formula her father had taught her. Twin primes beginning with 3 and 5. 5 and 7, 11 and 13. The combination lies in the consecutive twin primes added to the Euclid constant for the 5 dials. Performing the calculation swiftly in her head, her ash-gray eyes gleamed with the sharp intellect of a librarian and a mathematical genius. She turned the first dial, 17 the second dial, 19 the third dial, 29 the fourth dial, 31 the fifth dial, 41. With each turn, the mechanical gears inside the iron chest responded with sharp, dry clicks. Lady Evelyn's sneer remained at first, but as she watched Genevieve adjust the dials without a moment's hesitation, the smirk on her lips began to freeze. Henry Vance leaned forward slightly, cold sweat beginning to bead upon his brow. He stammered, "It cannot be, she is but a mere girl. How could she possibly comprehend the sequence?" Turning the dial to the final number 41, Genevieve paused, took a deep breath, and pressed the central brass latch. Click! The heavy iron bolt inside disengaged with a satisfying snap. No acid vial shattered. The lid of the chest slowly swung open, leaving everyone in the room in stunned amazement. Lady Evelyn staggered back, her feather fan slipping from her fingers and fluttering to the floor. Henry Vance's face turned as pale as ash, and the cane in his hand nearly fell. Genevieve slowly raised the lid. From within, she carefully lifted out her father's thick, leather-bound journal, alongside a dark glass bottle bearing the sealed label of the Royal Apothecary. She turned to Sir John and Mr. Abernathy, her voice ringing clear and resolute. "My lord, this is the original journal of my late father, the Earl of Harlow, written in his own hand before his passing. In these final pages, he documented in detail how Lady Evelyn forced him to use this particular metallic purple ink to complete his ancient translations. This concoction contains an exceptionally high concentration of arsenic. Absorbed gradually through the skin of his fingers over many months, it resulted in paralysis and chronic poisoning." She placed the dark glass vial on the table of confrontation. "This vial is the physical evidence my father hid to protect himself. A chemical analysis by the royal physician will soon prove it beyond doubt. And this," Genevieve continued, drawing out a bundle of correspondence between Lady Evelyn and Henry Vance, "is the letters detailing their plot to poison my father and forge debt settlements, all to seize the Harlow estate and the Ravenscroft antiquities." Mr. Abernathy immediately took the documents, examining the seal and signature with care before nodding to Sir John. "My lord, the seals and signatures are an exact match. These documents constitute irrefutable ironclad evidence." "This is slander, you wretched creature." Henry Vance lunged forward in a frenzy, attempting to snatch the bundle of documents from the table. Yet before he could reach the table, Alistair's hand, as unyielding as cold steel, clamped around his wrist and hurled him violently onto the stone floor. Alistair Vance stood tall and imposing before him, his dark blue eyes looking down with the icy judgment of a Lord Deliverer. "Do you think you shall ever lay a hand upon my wife again?" Sir John rose, striking his gavel firmly upon the table. "Lady Evelyn Harlow and Henry Vance, you are under immediate arrest for the murder of the late Earl of Harlow, forgery of his last will, and embezzlement of public funds. The entire Harlow estate and all its properties shall be restored in full to the sole legal heir, Genevieve Harlow. Constables, take them into custody." The constables immediately rushed in, dragging a screaming Lady Evelyn and a trembling, defeated Henry Vance out to the waiting prison carriage. Beverly stood frozen in the corner, his face drained of all color. Genevieve turned her gaze to him, her voice arctic cold. "Viscount Beverly, the ledgers detailing your smuggling of antiquities were also preserved within this iron chest. The bank has frozen your assets as of this morning. You are utterly ruined." Beverly collapsed to his knees upon the mahogany floorboards, stripped of all the arrogance of a London gentleman. The grand drawing room returned to a warm stillness. Genevieve closed her eyes, a single warm tear tracing a path down her cheek. The years of injustice, the death of her beloved father, All of it had finally been cleared by her own intellect, and the truth locked within the iron chest. Alistair stepped to her side, gently brushing away the tear with his finger. He draped a warm velvet cloak over her shoulders, pulling her into the solid comfort of his embrace. "You did splendidly, Genevieve. You are the true heart and Duchess of this estate," he whispered softly in her ear. 2 weeks passed following the arbitration that had scandalized the ton. The London season was drawing to its final warm days. Ravenscroft Townhouse hosted a grand ball to celebrate the restoration of the Duchess's honor. Splendidly attired guests gathered in throngs beneath the crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom. No malicious whispers lingered here. The entirety of the ton, including the formidable Lady Jersey of Almack's, were present to pay their respects to Genevieve. Genevieve wore a gown of pure white satin, embroidered with gold thread in the pattern of Ravenscroft roses, her throat adorned with the heirloom sapphire ring gifted to her by Alistair. She walked with grace beside her husband, requiring no Almack's voucher to validate her worth. Her intellect, resilience, and quiet pride were the most illustrious honors she could wear. Lady Jersey approached, dipping into a respectful curtsy. "Your Grace, London society is deeply honored by your presence. Your brilliance is indeed a credit to us all." The orchestra began to play a melodious waltz. Alistair bowed slightly before Genevieve, extending his broad hand. "May I have the honor of the first waltz, my Duchess of Ravenscroft?" Genevieve placed her slender hand in his palm, her smile radiant. "The honor is entirely mine, Alistair." Together they stepped onto the center of the magnificent ballroom floor, gliding to the music beneath the glow of 1,000 candles. Alistair's arm held her waist securely, shielding her from every storm. Genevieve rested her head lightly against his shoulder, finding true peace at last. Her triumph lay not merely in unmasking her enemies, but in having found a man who respected her mind and would protect her with his very life. The Ravenscroft townhouse was filled with music and warm affection, looking toward a future of complete and perfect happiness.